Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book from Oxford University Press. It's part of the Blackstone's collection on practical policing, directly relevant of course to police officers, members of the police service. It's called Covert Investigation, now in a 5th edition. It's very much at the forefront of quite a lot of investigations today because of the way society has developed. The book has been written by two people, Clive Harfield and Karen Harfield, and there's an excellent foreword from Professor John Grieve, whom many of you will know when he was at the Met Police in London. As I say, this is an important book, and Elizabeth wrote was the main lead writer on the book. We did discuss the book in some detail before she produced this original draft, which I've slightly edited for the presentation. The title of our book review is The Police Hunter-Gatherer's Toolkit, a practical guide to a complex and often controversial area of law. And it certainly is, because a lot of people don't like it. Covert Investigation, there's the front, interesting front cover, the paperback, there's the spine. It's not a big book. There's some information on the back. It's a bit difficult to read really on this YouTube review. The reason I'm reviewing this is so that you know about these books depending on what you're doing with your professional work. There's the index at the back. It's by page numbering. It's not a big index at all. It's a relatively small index. Please note that the page references will follow to tables will follow the letter T. So there are tables and there's further information blocks and various other things in it because it is very much a practical book. There's the front cover there, and then you can see after that there is a dedication, which I shall just show you there. Always like to show the dedications. A lot of work goes into these books from people, and it's important to be aware of how much effort has been put in. There's the foreword by Grieve, and well worth reading, very important. In fact, the 4th edition he did a foreword to as well, and the 3rd and the 2nd and the 1st. So you've got 5 lots of Grieve. In fact, John has put a lot of effort into all of these, and he's got a tremendous amount of experience. There's a structure of the book in terms of contents of the various parts running through, and then it's got 14 chapters, and the last one, what does good covert investigation look like? An interesting final question. Then there's an index right at the end. Then you've got some abbreviations, quite useful in this area because there's a lot of abbreviating that goes on. They do actually have MI5, which is called the Security Service, and MI6, which is called the Secret Intelligence Service. So you see, those are the abbreviations that may help you. Then there's an introduction, and then after that, the introduction, we get into the various parts. There's part 1, which says Managing Covert Investigations, and you get a little index, quite useful. Oxford University Press are good at that. I like the way that they do these little indexes because it does make a bit of difference when you're actually trying to find things. And then of course you've got further information to read, in other words bibliography, but it's a book that you can read through reasonably quickly. As I say, you've got quite a lot of this blocking, these various blocks, and they are of assistance. This is chapter 5. This is Managing Investigations. Then there are key points and so forth all the way through. Well, what do we think about the book? It's very good of OUP to do these, produce these books, because I think they add an additional dimension to what is currently going on within overall policing, because the police service is changing very, very quickly as threats change and society changes. Notwithstanding austerity, we're still looking at a very different world, say from the 1960s and 70s, for instance. So what do we say? Well, we say this. The fact that this is the 5th and latest edition of Covert Investigation from OUP is a testament, we say, to the book's enduring popularity and above all its usefulness and the special insights it provides into the diverse legal, ethical and moral issues inherent in implementing police intelligence techniques. And that's exactly what the book is aimed at, and obviously the audience is the police. certainly criminologists, lawyers, and I think a general readership too. And of particular interest, I think, to practitioners and to the police is the foreword from John Grieve. Now, he is the former Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Met, and he will be best remembered for his trenchant and rueful comment on what he termed institutional racism in the police service in the wake of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry some years ago. He's known for his clear-eyed objectivity, and he commends this book as a rare and valuable example of its kind. And in fact, that's exactly what it is. I mean, I'm very glad that he's been able to write a further comment on it, because he's done, as I say, a comment for each of the editions, and he's a man. I'm familiar, obviously, with the work he did. He's a man who did a great deal during the time holding a very senior position within the Met. Now, referring to the extreme pressures and almost impossible expectations placed upon the shoulders of investigators and their supervisors, politically, financially and legally, often via the media, what Grieve does is he adds that covert investigation, whether in the real physical world or online, is, quote, one area of policing of widespread democratic concern, and this book contains blueprints of the best ways of how to act. Now, I think that's quite important, and I also think for anybody involved in intelligence training and work, they will find this book of some assistance as well, if they're involved, as I have been a long time ago now, in both intelligence and security work. This is very much the security side of the activities, but I think that will be very important for them to read, and certainly anybody involved in the I Corps and in policing should know about this book and actually read it. Let me go on to say, yes, the very problems that we have with policing today, the very concept and the operational methods of covert investigation present some tricky dilemmas for a lot of people. As I say, there are a lot of pressures concerning this particular area of activity. There are moral and ethical considerations which loom large, sometimes even larger than the statutory requirements. And of course, as I say, it's controversial, it's exciting to some people, although the reality is it's incredibly boring. But there are often spurious demands of individuals for individual privacy which have been raised, and in any society one has to be aware of how far one can go, basically, in a free society. And I think the balance is achieved here, bearing in mind, as I say, it is controversial, and there are a lot of people politically who don't agree with this sort of work. So I think it's important to know how far you go, because the aim, just to remind people what the aim is to protect the citizens. And the question is, how far do you go? And that's really the issue. So here, the authors Harfield and Harfield put forward the view that when a crime is suspected, quote, the moral rights of the community of which individual victims, potential victims, form a part, to be protected from serious crime or have such a crime investigated and prosecuted as fully as possible, and must, in the circumstances, that must outweigh a suspected individual's moral right to privacy. And that's where the balance is, because clearly as counsel I see the cases in court, and we do have PACE, we had the old judges rules in the past, we have a lot of legislation which does give protection to the citizen against the state, and I think that that is an important balance that we are talking about at any given time, which is why I think this book is of value not just to policemen but to a much wider readership. Let me conclude by saying this. Of special interest to legal practitioners, we think, is Grieve's observation that the book maps the legal minefield that the legislation has created for police decision makers. There is a problem there, in that it explains the processes by which certain traps intended to undermine the investigators' and prosecutors' case can be avoided. And I think, again, that might be useful for members of the criminal bar to read as well, because I think they would find this book of some help. So finally, he says, is a remarkable addition to the police hunter-gatherer's toolkit. That's a lovely expression, that. And one might add, an essential addition to the professional library of the well-informed practitioner, whether he be lawyer, criminologist, policeman, the law enforcement end, or whatever it might be. Date of publication of the book is the 12th of September 2018. Let's have one last look at it. There it is. There, it's a paperback. There, and then the back. As I say, I thought it was a very interesting book. There are scenarios, for instance. They love the word scenarios. In other words, it's an example illustrating things that might happen. You've got further information all the way through about what you can and can't do. When does directed surveillance require an intrusive surveillance authority? You see, we've got into a position today where there are lots of checks and balances all the way through. And you've got safeguards and protections going on to that, which you've just been talking about there, for instance. This is provisions relating to confidential journalistic material and sources. Again, it is striking the balance all the way through. Thank you very much to Clive Harfield and to Karen Harfield for producing the new edition, and of course to OUP for producing it. I think it's a very great help to policemen and to anybody else involved in this particular area, which is a difficult area. But it's one, I'm afraid, sadly, that we need to know a bit about, and we mustn't get too emotional about it, because at the end of the day, the purpose is to try to protect our society. Thank you to OUP and everybody involved. I found it a fascinating read. Bye-bye.